welcome everyone from Bangladesh and across the world. Thank you ever so much for making the time to come today. My name is Chris Hoard. As Matty says, I'm a Teams MVP from here in the UK, also an MCT regional lead. And today the session is going to be on Microsoft Teams loves Microsoft Lists. So it's the integration and interplay between these two applications. So what to expect from this session today? I'm going to break it down into three parts. The first part is going to be what is Microsoft Lists and how it works in context of Microsoft Teams. Secondly, how do they both work together? We need to understand from both a lists and a list items perspective of how that works in Teams. Last of all, we're going to take a small peek at the roadmap and what's ahead. I don't want you to think that everything you've seen today is going to be the finished article. So all of those things should give you a baseline understanding of using Microsoft Lists within Microsoft Teams. Now, the level that this is pitched at is level 200, which means that it's an intermediate session. So you will have to know a little bit about Microsoft Teams, but not a great deal. Okay, just what Microsoft Teams is. And if you've used Microsoft Teams before, that would be an advantage. The scope is going to focus purely on the Teams experience because Lists also has a web app experience and a phone experience, but this is going to focus on using Lists within Teams. The last thing, and what is a caveat, is just that both Microsoft Lists and Microsoft Teams are rapidly changing. Microsoft Ignite is next week, so we could hear a lot more announcements and things can look very different in the future. So this session is probably applicable for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, so let's get started out. So what are lists? So Microsoft Lists was a Microsoft 365 app that's designed to help you track and organize your work. I think we all know in day-to-day life what a list is. A list is a series of items that we order in order to be able to track what we're doing. They can be tasks, they can be items, but the Microsoft Lists app is an app that's designed to do that across all of Microsoft 365. Now, lists aren't something that's new within Microsoft 365. Indeed, lists have been used within SharePoint for a long time, so they're not brand new. This is not something that's absolutely groundbreaking. What is groundbreaking is that Microsoft are evolving them so that it becomes its own dedicated app and it can be used across the Microsoft 365 stack. So if you think of Microsoft Lists as really breaking or evolving from SharePoint Lists. Now, this was publicly announced at Microsoft Build back in May 2010, or 2020, should I say. So when we heard that announcement at Microsoft Build, we heard the announcement that Microsoft will be delivering a web app experience. That came out in July. The integration with Teams, that came out in September. And the web app, or should I say the iOS mobile app experience. And funnily enough, that's been in beta for the last few months and has just come into GA. So we're really now, I guess, a GA steady state with Microsoft Lists as it's been rolling out over the past 8 months or so. So Microsoft Lists is a Microsoft 365 app that's designed to help you track and organize your work. We are in this session exploring how we bring that together with Microsoft Teams. Now, Microsoft Teams, as we know, is that hub for teamwork. It's bringing together our workloads such as chat, meetings and calling and apps. And in this scenario, we're bringing together our lists. So essentially, the team can work together on a list. Now, what are some examples that we can start out with where we can think of why a team would work on a list? Well, the first one is up there on the top right-hand side. I want a list of mobile devices my team manage in order to be able to track and manage them. So imagine I have a company, there's 25 users, and I have to provide every one of those 25 users with a mobile to help them do their work. How would we track those mobile phones? We would do so in a list. In the list that I create within Microsoft Teams, I would put things like who owns that list, who owns the mobile, what's the operating system of the mobile, who are the vendors, and so forth. We're using a list as an inventory of all our mobile phones. Another scenario here, I want to create a list of repeatable steps my team must take to launch any online event. So imagine again the same scenario. I have a business, there's 25 users, and I have an events team within that business, and they want to launch online events like this one that we're coming to now. A list is really good to put all the steps that we have to take in order to launch our online event. So that can be used in the terms of shared instructions or team processes. So those two examples just give us a very good idea in our heads at how we can use lists within Microsoft Teams, because we can do that within any team or any channel that we want. But there's loads more use cases that we can think about of using lists: issue tracking, itinerary, contacts lists, roadmaps, KPIs. The use scenarios is really dependent, or should I say limited, on your own imagination. Now, if we're thinking of apps that might be in the Microsoft Teams App Store that could be alternatives to lists, we're thinking of apps such as Asana, Rike, or Monday.com. So if you're having a conversation with a customer and they have one of those alternatives, it might be a good time to start talking about Microsoft Lists and the fact that the Lists app is included within the Microsoft 365 SKU, because the organizations you're talking to might be paying more for the functionality that they're using. Now, when we start to roll out lists with Inside and we start getting hands-on, it's very important to, first of all, distinguish lists from the rest of the applications within Microsoft 365. This is a conversation that I've had a lot over the past 6 months. So the application in the Microsoft 365 stack that lists often get compared to and compared to wrongly is the task applications such as Planner and To Do, because the first question that people tend to ask me is, can you put tasks in a list? And the response to that really is yes, you can put tasks in a list, but the question really becomes, should you put tasks in a list? Because both Microsoft and other third-party vendors have really kind of tried to differentiate lists from the rest of the applications within the stack. So lists is to be able to track and organize your work. Tasks, so Planner, are the tasks you manage at an organization level. To Do is the tasks you manage on a personal level. And that's really important. This kind of example is the conversation that we should be having with our organizations and clearly distinguishing what list does. The reason why this is so important is from an adoption perspective. If we're not clearly distinguishing what lists is designed to do when our users start to use it, they may end up using them in the wrong way. So even before we start, that's something that we need to consider. In addition, lists has a couple of prerequisites. So for the web app experience, the experiences on the web, and I'll just go and show you, give you a quick using lists on the web. What you need for that to get started is an Office or Microsoft 365 plan. You also need to have SharePoint enabled within that. You may want to have a few people within your organization, a subset of those users on targeted release, because targeted release will get the new features before people that are on the standard cadence. But an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 plan and having SharePoint enabled are the only things you need to get started with a web app experience. With Microsoft Teams, you need a little bit more. You need to have Teams enabled within your Office or Microsoft 365 plans. You also need to have the correct app permission policies and Teams policies set. So if a user in your team wants to go and create a list, then lists the admin needs to permit lists within the app permission policies, but the team owner needs to allow the users to be able to create apps within their team. If you want members to be able to create lists, you might just want to restrict them to team owners, for example. The mobile app, on the other hand, in order to start using that, you need the App Store access, and you need the install rights. And also as well, this one has caught people out quite a bit, is that you need iOS 13 in order to use that today. There is, at the current time, no Lists app for Android, but Microsoft has been getting that feedback. When they launch it on one mobile platform, they will always receive feedback to launch it on another. So in the future, we may see it released for Android as well. So from a prerequisite perspective, there's not much we need to actually get started with using lists within Microsoft Teams. Another thing we have to consider before we start rolling out is, where is the lists data stored? It's very important, not just from, we talked about from an adoption perspective and being very clear with users about what lists is. We've talked about it from a technical prerequisites. As admins, what's really important is that day one users are beginning to use lists within Teams. Where is that data actually stored? And it's kind of really important to point out that there is two kinds of lists, and most people don't realize this. First of all, you have personal lists, and those are lists for an individual. They are housed within OneDrive. The lists that are going to be pertinent to us, the ones that are created when you use them in Microsoft Teams, are Teams lists, and they are housed within SharePoint. Comments on lists are also just housed within SharePoint as well. The only thing, right, that is basically not stored in the SharePoint ecosystem from a list perspective is, as I will show you today, discussions that take place in the Teams UI. So comments within Teams, because those are actually stored in Azure. So generally speaking, this should get you kind of really to grips with understanding where that data is located. Now, those personal lists for an individual as opposed to a team, and the ones that are housed within OneDrive, can actually be disabled via PowerShell. And there are a lot of companies, okay, that I know that have done this already. So they've disabled the personal lists. They just move ahead with Teams lists because they want the transparency, but also as well is that they want them housed within SharePoint, so that if any user leaves the business, then somebody else will have access to be able to work on that list. So that's just an important to understand. Also as well, you probably don't want company critical lists being in people's OneDrive. So you, again, you may want to disable them. In terms of the limits, 30 million list items. This applies whether in the web app experience or Teams. 50,000 uniquely permissioned list items. So that's quite a lot. I mean, I don't know any organizations who have gone up to that. 250 meg max for files attached to list items, and 25 terabytes of max storage for a SharePoint site. So like all the data for Microsoft lists, it goes into the SharePoint ecosystem. The limits are defined by the SharePoint limits. So when we think of lists, okay, even though they've evolved into their own application as such, they're housed within SharePoint. The data is housed in the SharePoint ecosystem, and the limits are still based upon SharePoint lists through which they've evolved. Now, how are lists surfaced in Teams? So this is probably the last talk slide before we actually go on to the demo for the rest of the session. So it's very important in understanding where our data is held, how we actually surface lists within Teams, and we surface them as what we call tabs. So if I jump into my demo environment and go into Teams, I'm pretty sure that you know what a tab is. So this is how we surface lists within Microsoft Teams. We do not surface them as a personal app. In other words, you will never see lists as an app on the left-hand side. They're not messaging extensions. They're not connectors. And just to reiterate, when we create a team through lists, we're creating a team list that is housed within SharePoint. We are not creating a personal list that we house within OneDrive. Okay, so if you can remember that will be one of the most valuable things that you can remember from the session. So we get on to demo for the rest of the session, which is really cool. So adding, okay, a list to Teams, adding a team list, as it were. There are very many ways to do that. We can add it through a new channel tab, we can add it through the app route, or we can add it through the App Store. There are many different ways to do this. Let's get straight into the demo environment, because I like showing as opposed to talking about slides. So we want to surface a list within our team. Here I am in my team, Microsoft list in the general channel. I click on the add in that tab. I type in lists and there we go. There's the list app. All we need to do is to click on that list app, click save, and we start the process. So I can either create a list or I can add an existing list. So first of all, I can add the list as a tab. I can also add it from the app rail. So if I click on lists, there we go, lists will crop up. And if I add it here, you will see add to a team. So I click on add to a team, it'll ask me the team. I will select the channel that I want to put it in. And then again, it starts out the same, exactly the same process. And there we go, it's created my second tab. I can also create it through the App Store. Goes into the same process. I can even start it from the command bar. So if I start typing it, and there we go, starts out for the same process. So there are several ways that we can begin to add a list to one of our channels within our team. How do we actually create the lists themselves? There's 4 different ways. We can create them from blank, from Excel, from existing list, or from a template. So when we start that process of adding a list, we will go through almost a wizard in order to be able to create it. And there are many kind of pros and cons of each method. So let's just explore them. First of all, I'm going to create from a blank list. I'm going to create from scratch. So I'm inside my team. Let's go to the first one that I created. So here we go. I'm going to create a list. So if I create that list, here's the screen, almost the wizard. I'm going to create a blank list. Okay. Here is my list. I will give it a description. I will choose a color and I will choose an icon. Now, what is this for? This distinguishes the list in the web app. So if you're using the web app, you can easily and visually distinguish what that list is all about. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Here we go. There's my list created in almost 2 seconds, but it's completely blank. It's a blank list after all, but I can go ahead and I can start creating my list items, or I can start creating my columns. So I'm going to create a column, call this column 1. I'm going to click save. And this will be quite familiar to people that have used SharePoint lists. There are many different column types that you can choose from. You can choose a single line of text, or a location, or a number, or a yes/no question, or a person from your Azure Active Directory, or a date and time. There's many different types that you can choose from. Okay, so I've just created one column. Here is my item. So I can call this item 1. Okay, I'm going to click save. And there we go. So if I edit that, column 1 is showing up. So you can see I've created my first list item. Just to reiterate that, item 2, column item 2, and then I'm going to click save. And there we go. My list is starting to grow. So that's how we create it from blank. Now let's go on to the next method from Excel. So we can upload an existing Excel that's been formatted as a table. This is really good if you've been using lists on Excels. You know, many of us have lists and they're stored in our OneDrive. We really want to get them into the cloud as opposed to sitting in Excels on our local machine. So let's go ahead and do this right now. So I'm going to go to the second tab that I created. I'm going to create that list, but I'm going to create it from Excel. So I can either upload from my local machine, or what I can do is, if I've already uploaded an Excel to a file, then I can select a channel, select that Excel, and then click next. Here we go. So it's loading up the table. It takes a second or two. So in that Excel, there's all that data in that Excel. Now it's very important for this to show it needs to be formatted as a table. So before you do this process, you'll jump into the Excel, you'll format the list as a table, and that's how it will be imported. Because if you don't format it as a table, this process will not work and it will not go smoothly. But you can select your column types. You can choose even not to import some. So if you only want to import 2 or 3 columns within that table, you can do. But want to import that. I click next. It goes through the same process again. Here we go. And I'm going to create. This one takes a little bit longer because it has to import, okay, the data. But there we go. How quick was that? So I've not needed to manually sit there and go through line and line and build it. It's actually done it for me, you know, in the case of literally 15 seconds. So that saved me a lot of time. Let's go on to method 3, okay, from an existing list. Now, this is essentially cloning a list from an existing list. So instead of having to build all the columns and from scratch, what it will do is it will transplant that from an existing list into another. Let's go through that process. So I'm at my list again. Click save. I'm going to create my list, but I'm going to create from an existing list. And you can see that I've got a number of existing lists that are already there. I'm going to choose the one that I've just created, and I'm going to click next. Again, you can see I'm going through the same process, and I'm going to create that. So you can see that it has created it from an existing list. All of the columns are the same, but of course it doesn't transfer over the data. Now, why would we want to do this? Imagine that I have to create the same type of list every month, but that list has different data in it every month. This is really good for meeting that real life scenario. Okay, we then have from a template. So these are pre-designed templates from Microsoft. So if I go and create my last list, go into lists, I click save. I'm going to create my final list. I will create it from a template that has been provided by Microsoft. Now, as you can see here, there are 11 templates that Microsoft have provided. They cover a range of scenarios. You have an issue tracker, you have an itinerary, you have a recruitment or travel request. Microsoft have provided a scaffold for you in order to be able to move forward. But what's cool as well is that they're giving you ideas of the scenarios with which you can use lists. So let me just click on one. I'm going to click on the issue tracker. Microsoft give you a peek of what that list is going to ultimately look like. So when you create this, no data will be created, but Microsoft give you an idea of what it will look like when you start populating. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use that template. And again, I go through the same process as always. And like the last method, you can see that all the columns and the formatting has been created, and then all you would need to do is start to create your new item in all of the fields. Now, when it comes to the templates, some people, some organizations find this helpful, others don't. Now, a few months ago, I was working with the lists product team to give them feedback about this. And you can now disable this with PowerShell. So there's the PowerShell command under that you'll see use set SPO tenant, disable modern list templates, and then you would provide the template ID. Now, where do you get that template ID? You get that template ID from docs.com. And as you can see, each of those 11 templates has a corresponding template ID. So if you wanted to disable all of them, you would need to run that command essentially 11 times or create a script which does them all at once. If you disable them, they will not show when you begin to create lists in Microsoft Teams. You will only be able to create them from blank Excel or from an existing list. Now, why would you want to disable them? Because some organizations have said that it can confuse people, or it can give them the wrong idea, or they may just want to begin to create their own rather than use something that's inherited from Microsoft. The choice is now yours to do. So moving on from being able to create lists, how do we favorite them? Because in the web app experience, it really is easy to be able to favorite. Now, there are many reasons why we want to favorite. All you need to do in the web app experience, hover over it and click a star. We favorite a list in the following circumstances. If we're working on that list for a prolonged period of time, if we need to step away and get back to that list easy, if we've got a high priority list that we're managing, or that we just want to keep track of that list and view it from time to time, it makes the list easy and to hand when we can favorite it. Now, you can't do that within Microsoft Teams. So how do we actually get around this? Well, as you can see, I've created a private channel. So that private channel is private to me. Okay. Now, if there's a list that I want to be able to access very easy, then all I will need to do is come into the web app experience. As you will see here, here is my equipment list. So here's one that I created earlier. And all you will need to do, okay, is take the URL. So there's the URL. Control C, copy that URL. Now in here, when we go to create our list, I'm just going to click save, same process as always. Instead of going to create a list, we just go to add an existing list. And we can use a SharePoint link. We will enter that link from our list, and assuming that we've got permissions on it. So this will take a moment or two in order to be able to load up. Okay, taking itself a bit of time. What it will do is it will essentially look like this. So let's go back to it. It might have just been taking a little bit of time. It can take maybe a couple of minutes in order to be able to surface. But the point of this is that you can have almost a set of tabs of your favorite lists that you need to access in Teams side by side. So it's a little bit of a workaround, but it is possible within Teams, but unfortunately not as slick as the web app experience. Now, in terms of sharing a list, we want to be able to work on people both inside and outside our organization. So we need to know how to share both a list and a list item. In terms of sharing the list, so if I go back, okay, into demo and I go to general, okay, and I go to a list that I have created previously. Here's my list. In order to share the whole list, we come up here to the right to the information icon. And then what we do is we click this purple button to add people. So we click on that button to add people. I'm going to add somebody outside my organization. Okay, so I'm going to add Vesku. Okay, there we go. Add in Vesku, and I can set his permissions. Full control, can edit, can view. I'm going to give him view, and then I'm going to grant him access. Access granted and notified. He will then be sent an email, which he can then come and access the list in the web experience. Okay, so access is granted. That's how we share whole lists within Microsoft Teams. However, how do we just share list items? Because sometimes we might have really sensitive lists, or we might have multiple people in different organizations that we want to share part of the list with. Sharing list items is just as simple. So let's say I want to share this item here. We click on the three dots. Okay, we go to manage access. Now what I can do is I can share with him the link if I want to share a link. And then same as before. There we go. As you can see, it won't work for people outside your organization. So for links, okay, so there's another VESA inside my organization here. There we go. That will send him a link, but direct access you can only do with external users. So we would direct access, click the plus sign. And again, edit or can view. I'm going to give him the view permission and I'm going to grant him the access. And again, that access has been granted. So it's really important to understand that we can share from within Teams the whole list, or we can share the list item. And you've got edit permissions, read permissions, or full control. But the full control is only on the whole list as opposed to the item. The item is really just edit and read permissions. Now, this gets around to the question, because I get this question all the time about how kind of guests or members of the team, what access do they have by default? By default, if the team members have edit permissions, by default, guests have read permissions, and sharing is controlled by the SharePoint Admin Center. So if I come to the whole list, if I click that icon, okay, and I click on Manage Access, here we go, you can see that you can change this anytime you want. So if I want to change my guests inside the environment and they just can view, or you want to open it up and they can edit, or if you want to stop sharing that list with guests altogether, you can do. Same applies for members of the team, because you might just have a list that you want people to read from, but not to be able to edit. So that's just some option for you. Now, being able to share externally goes back to, so if I jump into the admin portal here, the admin portal is just going to load up. If I come to the SharePoint Admin Center, and if I come to policies and then sharing, this will define how, and if you can share lists. So if, for example, okay, this was set to the least permissive permissions, I wouldn't be able to share lists in Teams with anyone outside my organization whatsoever. If I do that, I can share Teams lists that I create within Teams within anyone. And if I did this, I could share personal lists that I created in the web app experience and are housed in OneDrive with anyone. So it's just understanding that it can be centrally controlled, the sharing from an organization basis. Now, customizing a list, renaming and restyling is not possible to do within Teams. This is only possible with inside the web app experience. So for time, we might have a typo in the name of a list. We might need to rebrand the list, or it could have a functional name change. So for example, if I go into the web app experience and I go back to see my lists, I could, for example, want to change the name of this list. And in the web app experience, it's very easy to do so. I go to customize, I change the name, I change the color. Bang, you can see that that has just changed the name and changed the color and the description immediately within the web app experience. But if I go back to Teams, even though it will still work and connect to the list, you can see that the name of the tab hasn't changed. So you just have to be very careful when customizing lists with, the name within the list web app experience. If I'm going to align it, I rename it. So I can't recommend enough, if you change the tab name or if you customize the list name and change it, just to make sure that both are, you go and do both. Otherwise, you'll get issues when trying to work with your lists. So you have to align it there. Exporting, very, very simple. If I want to export that list, so if I want to get that list back out, all I need to do is click on the three buttons and then export to Excel and then download that IQY file. Now that IQY file, that doesn't look, that might not be a file name or extension that you recognize. You open that within Excel. So always open IQY files within Excel. You will have a few warnings when you try to open it. Click yes, and then all of the information will surface. So if I open that file, you can see there, I get the enable. It will take like a minute or so. There we go. So it's actually got the path. I might not need that path. Just going to hide it. And there we go. That's all the information that's exported. Now, why would we want to export a list? Well, sometimes we might want to review it offline. We might want to make some amendments in order to be able to re-import it, specifically if you've got large lists, or you might just want to have a local backup from time to time. I know people that do. They're all valid reasons in order to be able to do so, but it's easy to export that Excel. I see a lot of people that take it out, clean it up, and then import it back via Excel. So there's lots that do that too. In terms of deleting, it's really important to understand. We've shown how to create a list, but how do we delete it? You can't actually do this within Microsoft Teams. You can't delete the list here. So you would click on Files. Okay, this is probably the easiest way to get to it, and then click Open in SharePoint. And you will get back to SharePoint. So here we go. So this shows you the list within SharePoint. You come up to the right-hand side here, okay, and then you go, and then you get to the list settings through the SharePoint navigation. An alternative way to do this is to actually go to the Lists web app, find the corresponding list. Okay, so I'm going to pick this one. Yeah, and then I'm going to click on the cog. You can see here I've got the list settings, and right in the center of the screen, delete this list. Are you sure you want to put this list? And that goes into the SharePoint site recycle bin that the list is actually housed in. Now, if you delete a personal list which is housed within OneDrive, that will go into the recycle bin in OneDrive. And that's really important to understand where that goes, because it means if you want to restore a list, you can restore a list from the SharePoint site recycle bin. So if you accidentally delete it, if it's the wrong list, then you can get it back by going into the recycle bin. The same applies to lists as it does to documents. So you have a set amount of days in order to be able to get it back. Really important to understand how to do that. But what's also equally important to understand is that just by removing a list, okay, so if I click remove, that will not delete the list. Okay, removing a list is just removing it from Teams. That list will still exist. If I go back to the Teams web app experience, that list will still exist right there. So you can only delete it within SharePoint. Okay, so don't get worried if you accidentally remove the tab. That's not going to delete the list. Okay. Moving quickly on, okay, as we get into the kind of the latter half of the session, then we've got the ability to work with lists themselves. It's not just the whole list, but with list items. So we move to the in list. We have filters, views, and formatting. So we want to work with our lists, okay, within different ways. Let's go back to my list. So say, for example, I want just the items on that list from Adam. We can use a filter. Filters right next to the information bar, and I can call out all of Adam's line items by just selecting a filter. So I can get the view, I can dig and get to the information quickly. If there's a filter that I do not see on this list, I can just click on the button, okay, and I can filter by. Or, for example, I can add it to the filters pane. So if you do not see a filter in there, you can actually pin the column into the filter. That's a great way to dig down to the information that you need. You also have many different types of views. So what you're seeing right here is the default view, which is the list view. Okay, but you can also have a compact list, which squeezes the list items up together. You can also have this nice gallery view. So I'm just going into a list that I created earlier for this. If I click on this gallery view, look at that. That looks much nicer and much more user friendly for the list. You know, if I've got a list on products in my organization where I wanted to show a picture of that, that would be perfect for this. We also have the new calendar view. So if, for example, I wanted to create a calendar, I can see it in a calendar format. That probably came out a couple of months back now. And if I scroll back, scroll ahead a little bit, probably be able to see them in a second. There we go. That's how they would look in the calendar view. So you can almost have, I would say, a common calendar between users for particular kind of actions and steps. This is really good for that. Now, how do we create a calendar view? All we would need to do is come to the actual views itself, and we will create a new view, and we would create a calendar view. Very easy to do and straightforward. We've also got the grid view. Okay, so if I come back to my list, if I want to edit easily in the grid view, so I'm just going to, you know, make some changes. I want to apply Microsoft to several of these. There we go. And then I exit the grid view. Very, very easy in order to be able to make those changes when editing in grid view. The cool thing about grid view as well, okay, is that if you've got a kind of a horizontal list, so like this one, if I edit that in the grid view and I scroll over to the side, you get the sticky first column. So that's a kind of a great functionality. You also have custom views and formatting. So let's say that I wanted to create a view specifically for me. So here's my equipment list. Let's say I wanted to create a view where the owner was organized in A to Z. So there we go. I do A to Z on the column, but I wanted to make that the default. I can then save the view and call it what I want. And there we go. There's the view. But what's also a really cool thing is that we have this thing called formatting. We can format the columns for what we want to do with them. I'm just going to take this example here. Now you can see this formatting here in this track. I formatted it so that each track name has a different color. But one of the really cool ways that we can format is use advanced formatting. So you can see here that you have these email addresses. I'm going to go to the column settings. I'm going to format this column. I can do conditional formatting, and there's some rules that you can use there, but I'm going to go to the advanced mode, and I'm going to use what you call JSON in order to be able to format this. So there's my JSON. Okay. I'll remove what's there. I put it in. And I've just hyperlinked all of the email addresses. So if you click on one of them, that will open Outlook and you can email people. So you've got kind of really two kinds of formatting. You've got the inbuilt formatting that you can work with. Again, go to column settings, format this column. So this is the inbuilt formatting right here, where you can, for example, going to add rules, show list items. So if I wanted to show those list items as the color blue, so that's the inbuilt formatting, or you can use custom formatting with JSON. You can also, when working with list items, you've got a kind of, as I've shown before, you can edit within the grid, but you can bulk edit. That's one of the, I would say, is the big benefits of working within the grid item. So let's get back to this. You can edit in the grid view and you can bulk change it this way. So there's Microsoft. Let's just say I made a mistake and I come back and I wanted to amend them. and these are going to be Jabras. So exit a grid view and they will all change, or I can simply bulk edit these. Okay, so I select all of them, I edit all of them. Change one of the fields, and look, it's changed automatically, so we can bulk edit. In the grid view, we can also undo now, but that's only in the web view. So if I was to change it here and come off, you can't see any undo button. Let's go and show you this in the web view. So in the web view, if I click in the web view and I go to edit in the grid view, if I change that now to 2, you can see, right, and I come off of it, I can now undo. So we do have the undo and redo capability, but today it's only in the web experience as opposed to Microsoft Teams. We can also reorder through dragging the columns. So if I wanted to drag the column left or right, this is extremely good if you have lists where the columns are like kind of a large horizontal set where it scrolls right off the page. And we can also delete columns too, but there's a caveat here, right? So I'm going to click on this column. I'm going to go to the column settings. 2 seconds. And then 2 seconds. Do the formatting. Try it on this other list. Okay. If I go to edit, sorry, you can see it's on delete on the right hand side. So if I click delete, you just have to be careful when deleting columns, because what happens is that columns will delete permanently. Okay. In other words, you can't restore them back, so you just have to be careful. A few of the last things to consider is just that you can have comments within your list item. So if I come into the list and I go to, let's go in the demo list. If I then what you can do is you can open the list item and you can begin the conversation in the right hand side. There we go, great list item. Now what's the cool thing here is that these conversations don't just restrict to the list item in this particular view. If you go to the posts, you can see that it starts a conversation in the post tab. That way the conversation isn't hidden on the list item. Really good if you want to review the item, if you've got any new ideas, or if there's any issues with that item, you can start a conversation with the rest of the team on it. But this comments that you've seen on this list item, this is the thing that isn't housed within SharePoint. This is housed in Azure. So this is the only thing within lists that isn't housed within the SharePoint ecosystem. We also as well have alerts. So if you want to be alert for any changes on your list, you can't do that within Teams. It has to be in the web experience. So if something changed so if a modification was made to the list or somebody deleted something, you come to the 3 buttons when in the list and you click alert me, and you will go through a process and fill out some information, for example. So any change on this list, all changes, and if anything changes, you send me a notification. I'm going to just call that equipment list change notification, and then I click OK. And I can see that that's been created. If I go to manage my alerts, you can see it's already been set up and it delivers an email. But this is changing slightly because Microsoft are moving into something called rules that was released, I think it was last month. If I just exit that grid view and I click on this and I go to automate, I can create a rule whether a column changes or a new item is created or a new item is deleted, and that is based upon Power Automate. So we think that alerts in the end are because they've been around since SharePoint lists, is probably going to be sunsetted at some point, and then we move ahead with rules. And now the last kind of functionality is that of Powerapps and Power Automate. Again, this isn't something that you can kind of manage directly within Teams, not within the list itself. You have to use Powerapps or Power Automate together with lists in order to be able to create this. I just want to show you what I mean here. So you will see here, I've got nothing else up here apart from edit, export, or open in SharePoint. When in my web view, you can see here, I've got the ability to automate, and I can create a rule, or I can in Power Automate create a flow, or I can, create an app off the back of this. So you will see in terms of Powerapps, lists can be surfaced within Powerapps in galleries or forms. There's just a quick screenshot of that. It takes a little while to open Powerapps, so I tend to focus more on the Power Automate side of things. But lists, if you've got galleries or forms in your apps, they are absolutely perfect for that. And whether working in Powerapps or working in Dataverse for Teams, you can use that for both. Now with Power Automate, you can build flows to connect your lists with other services. This is extremely powerful. So my last two demos is that I just want to show you these. So if you can imagine, here is my list, here's my event list, and I want to be notified in my team every single time that something is added to that event demo. So here we go. Now, where is that inside? So this is what my flow looks like. When an item is created, post a message. It's the most simplest flow in the world. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to add that new item. The speaker is Vesku. Moderator is Chirag. Date and time is today. Nation.rocks.room. Just going to use the same. The track is going to be the adoptions and governments track, and the speaker email address. I'm just going to leave that blank for the second, and then I'm going to save that. So I've added that new item to my list. I'm going to manually kick off the flow. Okay. If I go back to the posts, there we go. You can see this new session has been added to Teams Nation, and it gives me the session, the track, the speaker, the moderator, and the link to the session, which links back to the list item. So that's a really, really simple flow. A more elaborate one. Okay, so if I go back into flow, and I'm just going to show you how this works. So I'm just going to edit it. Now this is all designed to be able to get feedback for courses we run. Okay, so if somebody submits a form online, it gets housed in a list, and from that list, it goes through an approval process, and it gets sent to both the team, and I can post it out to Yammer. So let's just show you how it works here. Okay, so here is our course. I've just been on the course. I've attended my course. My instructor is Vesku. How would I rate that course? It was an excellent course. I'm going to say yes, 5, submit. Okay. Now, within Teams, if I go to that course list, okay, so I'm just going to prepare this. I'm going to test. I'm going to start this. It's going to run. It's been added into my list down the bottom. It's been posted to my team. It hits an approval process to say, do I want to push it out to Yammer? I say yes, I approve that. And then I open Yammer. Okay, and in my all company, come on. in my old company view, is then posted out to the rest of my organization. Okay, so you can get very powerful integration. Now we're right on time, so just to sum up, working with lists and teams, real simple to easily create and share. Smart because we can keep everyone in sync and add changes and removal. And we can also customize our list with the Power Platform. So it's, yeah, there's great integration between these two. And what's next is that we now have all the experiences, all the views, undo and redo and rules, they're all here with us. Offline working, that's going to be important because we can offline work within Teams, but we can't in lists at the moment. Mentions in list items. And what I think is the most important of all, that sticky first column that we can have so that we can reference within our lists. They should all be coming later in the month. So returning to outcomes, we looked at the what Microsoft lists are. We then looked in the context of how lists work with Microsoft Teams. This has been a large demo session of going through all of the functionalities. I literally had to go kind of have 30 seconds on a roadmap because I'm running out of time. But this was a level 200 intermediate session. I really hope you've enjoyed it. We focused on the Teams experience, but everything's always changing with Microsoft 365. So I would say that everything you've seen here is valid for at least 4 to 6 weeks, but could well change in the future. So I'd just like to thank you very much. It's an old slide. So